Good morning. Mike Anderson, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Cynthia.
Yeah. So I want to start by just telling listeners how I connected with you. I follow all sorts of articles on organizational culture and leadership and team building. And I had seen an article you authored in the Federal Reserve, and I liked it and I read it, and then I looked you up on LinkedIn, and you were so gracious to accept my invitation to connect, and then also to have a conversation. What I want to do is, Mike and I actually had a conversation about a week ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to capture some of these ideas on video. So thanks for doing this interview with me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm always excited to talk about culture and to talk about performance, and I'm glad that you reached out to me from my article in the Federal Times, and excited to speak with you this morning.
Thanks. So I'm going to start by just giving a little bit of information about your background. So I know that you began your career at a major media company and spent about 20 years in the Virginia area, Norfolk, Virginia, working not just in the HR function, but also kind of being groomed to be a general manager. And as you told me this story, you really loved most the work around people and what people could do, and sort of identified for yourself that that was going to be an area of passion. And then you were recruited actually to come up to Washington, D.C. and work as a political appointee as the chief HR officer at the White House in the Department of, well, I might be getting it wrong, Mike, Department of Urban and Housing first. You've also worked as a CHRO in the Office of Management and Budget. And then you've worked for the federal government as a consultant outside of the government, but again, in kind of an HR role. So have seen HR from a number of different angles.
That's right. Yeah, private sector, the government hired really as the CHCO, what we call the CHCO, which is the Chief Human Capital Officer at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And while in that role, I had an opportunity to go and spend time with the Office of Management and Budget at the White House and work on employee engagement across the federal government.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that fascinated me about connecting with you is, what is this whole topic of, human capital and engagement and performance in government? What's going on in government? Because obviously a huge opportunity. So what I'd like to do is maybe start on a couple of points you mentioned on our last conversation. One thing that you said, in looking at HR from the private sector as a political appointee, as a consultant, you said you love to look at organizational change from the perspective of what are the people all about. And you talked about how HR is really, a change agent and at the center of change. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yes. HR has evolved over the years. I first came to HR in an earnest way in 1995, I believe, 95, 96, and had my first full-time HR job in 97.
Okay.
I dabbled around the edges prior to that, but in 97, I started at the largest media company in Virginia, the Virginian Pilot newspaper in Norfolk, as you mentioned earlier. And that was around the time that HR was really making a shift from an administrative function to a strategic partner. And there was lots of writings out there on the topic of HR and how it was evolving into a strategic partner. And that fascinated me because I love strategy, particularly from the perspective of helping individuals to perform at their best and helping organizations to accomplish their mission. So HR and my coming to HR, it was fortuitous in that I enjoyed what was expected of HR and increasingly expected of HR, particularly in the private sector. And that was in 97. And by the time I started with the federal government as a chief human capital officer, I found that that my time in the private sector serving as a strategic partner in HR actually put me in a nice spot. I obviously had to learn the government version of HR and all the laws and rules and regulations, policies associated with the federal government. But the strategic HR work that I had been doing for 10, 15 years in the private sector actually gave me a competitive advantage in terms of how I went about HR work in the federal sector.
Comment a little bit more on that. So it gave you a strategic advantage. How so?
Yeah, what I found in the federal government is that the role of chief human capital officer in the federal government, it's a huge role, and the people that are in those roles have a lot of compliance, administrative, transactional work that is expected of them. And so it has only been in the last probably 10 years, which is 10 years after the private sector, that the strategic piece of HR has been an expectation and a requirement, I would say, in the federal space. So I had about a 10-year jump on most of my counterparts in the federal government as I assessed it. Now, I could have been assessing it wrong. That was just my read on it. But I found that I was able to get within my bandwidth to carve out the strategy stuff, which is what I gravitate to anyway. And quite frankly, I did not have the transactional background in the federal government that I had in the private sector. So I relied heavily on my federal partners in HR to help with the transactional work. So that actually gave me an opportunity to play more in the strategic space. Now later, as a federal consultant, I learned and had an opportunity to add the transactional work to my portfolio of skills. But at the time I was Chief Human Capital Officer at HUD, I really didn't have the transactional knowledge and expertise. I just had the strategic. So as they say, you get in where you fit in, and that's where I got in. And quite frankly, that's a lot of where Chief Human Capital Officers need to be today, is in that strategic space.
Yeah. The article that I read in the Federal News is the publication, I think you said, I want to read a quote out of that article. You said, many federal agencies will check the box on performance plans and employee engagement strategies, missing out on the symbiotic relationship between performance and engagement. I know in that article that was sort of the theme, and you highlighted some of your work at HUD. So I'm wondering if maybe you could just expand on what do you mean by that statement, and how did that come to life actually in HUD?
Yes. Again, going back to sort of the environment for federal agencies and not just in HR, but in many of the functional areas, it's like drinking from a fire hose. There are lots of requirements made on people's time, and so as the Chief Human Capital Officer, you're really trying to get things done, and there isn't a lot of time. You need two things: you need time and you need expertise. And so even when there's expertise, strategic expertise to connect the different human capital areas and discipline, many times there's not the time because of the administrative and transactional demands placed on them. So consequently, there's the hustle and the effort to get things done because they have to get them done by a certain date. For instance, with respect to performance plans in the federal government, usually, those are required to be completed by, end of January, mid-February at the latest.
And legal, I'm going to guess legally required by law.
Yes, there's a federal-wide mandate, and particularly their policy requirements within the agencies that will set time due dates in terms of when they must be in place. And those are typically incorporated in the bargaining agreements with the unions as well. So everybody's hustling to try to get those done by the stipulated due date. And there's not a whole lot of effort. And by the way, a lot of times these are being owned and led by different people inside of the HR department. So the people that are getting the performance plan done are different than the people that are doing engagement. And that's where the Chief Human Capital Officer being strategic is a big advantage because they can get those two groups together and make sure that there are connections between those two spaces. Otherwise, they're done on sort of parallel tracks, and there's not a whole lot of interaction between those two critical initiatives.
So, so instead of doing them siloed, a Chief Human Capital Officer that's taking a strategic approach is going to say, how do these two work together? How are they kind of connected? And that's the opportunity it sounds like you had in your position at HUD.
That's correct. And you can do that real time, obviously, by getting the group together and asking questions about the connections and the opportunities and the challenges. And also, there's a strategic plan, human capital strategic plan that is typically put together. So there's an opportunity for the Chief Human Capital Officer to articulate those connections in that human capital strategic plan so that everyone can see the connections, not only in the HR area, the human capital area, but beyond to the customers of HR, the operational areas, the program areas. So, but that takes, again, it takes time and it takes some expertise to be strategic in that way. And having done that in the private sector, it set me up to be able to do that in the public sector as well.
And you were able to accomplish some, hit some really cool goals at HUD in terms of improving engagement, for example. Is that, can you give us just like a little bit of like deeper dive into what specifically you were doing in performance management and in engagement, like just like in a scenario maybe?
Yeah. I have had the good fortune, I would say, to come in during my time in the federal government, to come into agencies when they were at their low watermark in terms of human capital metrics. So HUD was had its lowest engagement scores ever when I joined in 12 and took over as the Chief Human Capital Officer in 2013. And so what we did was to, number one, even before I started, the acting Chief Human Capital Officer before me had volunteered HUD to participate in a pilot program with the Office of Personnel Management in performance management. So that was already on the way when I got there, and that was a good thing because, as I said in the article, there's this sort of definite, and you can call it causative, or it can, you can call it correlative, but there's a definite relationship between performance management and employee engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a plus, and that was an important factor in the turnaround of HUD. But there are other things that are important too when it comes to engaging employees beyond performance. The climate matters, rewards, recognition, training and development, work-life balance, feeling respected, a supportive environment by management, supportive environment by coworkers. Leadership has an impact on those climate factors. And
Would
so,
you also call climate culture in some ways, like the culture of the organization?
in fact, I would say that climate leads to culture, is the way I would frame it. That, the climate kinds of things you can work on. They're typically programmatic kinds of things. They're experiential kinds of things. Culture results from those climate factors or programs.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, they're the same, or you can look at climate as antecedents to culture. Just depends on how you want to look at it.
So the culture grows out of some of what you've established in the climate and as leaders.
Yes, yes, I would say that's right. Culture is the reason I prefer to look at climate as antecedents to culture, is because culture is all encompassing, and climate involves individual programs and things that you can work on. Many of those things are in the HR area. Other things are in the program areas. Some things come from within the individual, such as intrinsic motivation, fit, job fit. So it's a more comprehensive concept.
And complex. Yeah.
And complex, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's
But I understand.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I understand what if people wanted to equate those two, it's fine. I just tend to break them apart.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. I just wanted to get clear on what you meant by climate. But I completely agree, because the things you're describing in climate, we might consider sort of false. They're symptoms of culture. They're but culture is really more intangible. It's when all the people get together and all of those climate factors are in place and the individual initiatives are working. What is the intrinsic experience of that is what we would call culture.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah.
So you were saying that back at HUD, while you had this opportunity to really approach strategically the opportunity to connect performance management and engagement, all those climate things were part of it too, thinking about those things.
Yeah. We in addition to performance management, participating in that pilot, which, caused us to do a deep dive and a comprehensive effort agency-wide in performance management. We also launched agency-wide comprehensive effort to fill vacancies, which we had about over 1,000 vacancies that had to be filled.
Wow.
And as you know, that can affect culture and climate in a substantial way. So we were able to fill those vacancies in 2014 because we had a budget. In 2014, the Congress passed the first budget as opposed to continuing resolutions. And so we were able to take a more long-term view and to fill the vacancies that we had. So that mattered. What also mattered is we were coming off of government shutdowns and government furloughs in 2013 that had impacted agencies. So we had plenty of opportunities to work on different aspects of people, climate, and to try and tell a story to make sense of what was going on, to recognize, acknowledge the realities of what was going on, but to offer a longer-term vision of what things could be and how we could rise to the occasion and really get our swagger back, because HR had lost its swagger in the preceding years, and so it was an opportunity for us to rise and shine, and I'm just delighted that our folks took advantage of that and stepped in after the furlough and the shutdown and hustled so that our people at HUD got paid early after we came back from the shutdown. That made HR people heroes in the eyes of the agency. When you haven't been paid in several weeks, and as a result of furloughs and the shutdown in particular, and you come back and you get a paycheck a week or so early, anything that you had against HR tends to kind of go away. So those were the kinds of stories that we told ourselves in HR. Is the agency needs us now more than ever, and what is it that we can do to serve our agency? How can we rise to meet the moment? And so we were able to do that. So within a period of a couple of years, we went from the worst place to work in the federal government, as measured by the Partnership for Public Service, to the most improved agency in the federal government. And a lot of that was due to, again, a confluence of things: the performance management pilot, the way we led and performed during the shutdown and after the shutdown, and the way we engaged employees, hiring those, filling those 1,000 vacancies that were there. So there was a lot of things that had to be, just like there's a lot of things in culture via climate, there are a lot of things in human capital that you have to kind of work on, and you really have to try to pick the ones that give you the biggest payoff, and figuring out where the symbiotic relationships are and taking advantage of those symbiotic relationships matter.
Well, congratulations. That's a huge accomplishment to have that measurement in place of how far you were able to take them. It sounds like it was a little bit of the perfect storm of, opportunity, but also that your background let you come in and lead strategically at that moment, and to get your team on board. You mentioned the last time we spoke that you look at leadership as is transformation, that it's a journey of transformation. And it sounds like you almost even kind of rallied your own HR team to step into that. Talk a little bit about leader, because you mentioned intrinsic motivation and this transformational leadership. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of leadership. And I believe that every person has leadership capabilities. So I want to be clear about that. Some, just like creativity and service and other competencies, we're gifted with different amounts of different competencies, but everyone has some of all of them. Mm-hmm. And so because leadership is so important, and the organization and individual's fate, if you will, depends a lot on leadership. I'm a big proponent of leadership development and asking everyone to lead in the organization, and taking on that responsibility in a formal role myself, and expecting others who are in formal leadership roles to lead. And that involves transformation. leadership is fundamentally about transformation. You're going from point A to point B. We're always trying to raise the level of play, go to the next level in an organization. And that requires overcoming challenges. It requires asking people to step up and meet the moment, whatever the challenges are in that moment. I believe it requires the leader being a servant of the people that she's leading rather, and that requires a lot of the individual who because you have to lead by example, because you're asking others to make sacrifices for the common good, for the mission, for shared goals, and to behave according to shared values. And so it's about the journey, the targets that we set for ourselves, the goals. They give us markers along the way, and we accomplish those things for the benefit of the mission. But importantly, along the way, we're transformed through that journey. And that's remarkable. That's the thing that I get most excited about and passionate about, is because we get paid as individuals to become better people, to become more effective performers, to fulfill our purpose, using the organization as a platform to fulfill our purpose. That's a wonderful thing if you can get it. And many of us have it. We just have to see it. And we have to have leaders who can help us to see it, willing to lead the way, to be the chief transformer.
Yeah, that's good. I like it. Yeah, as you were talking, you lit up. Like you talking about the opportunity to become transformed and to inspire people to step into that journey. I'm going to mention, because, we look at kind of individual storylines and personality types at Culture Talk. We use a system called Archetype, which is based in Jungian psychology and helps people to sort of see how their own personal stories and the things that light them up are part of bigger universal stories. And you happen to take our archetypal assessment, and your number one archetype was magician. And the magician story, right? So kind of, I feel like as I hear about how you lead, the magician story is a story of transformation. It's a story of, making those bold leaps from A to B, and inspiring those around you to see the possibilities. So I feel like you just came out here and embodied a magician archetype in terms of how you described how you lead. So that was cool. Really.
Yeah, it spoke to me. After I took the survey and read it, I was thinking, wow, that's me. And I get excited about the journey of life, and how we can be better people, how we can live our best life, how we can be better each day, and how we can overcome to take on greater challenges and to flourish as human beings. And I believe that happens best in groups, in teams, in organizations. Organizations are projections of power, hopefully for the common good and for the betterment of society. And so when you are able to find an organization that syncs with your values and allows you to flourish as an individual, and you have leaders that are there looking out for your interests as you look out for the interests of the organization, if you can get those stars to align, you're in a good spot. And then it's a question of, how do I leverage this opportunity to serve the customers, the stakeholders of the organization, and to leverage it as a platform to take my game and what I aspire to the next level. And so I get awfully excited about that, with finding like-minded people who see the opportunity, and trying to convince those who don't to see it as an opportunity to step into a moment and to see the wisdom or the what's in it for me in a way that is not just about money, it's not just about status, but it's about purpose.
Yeah, well said. You mentioned when we spoke that there's, having seen government agencies from all different angles, that you are always personally inspired as well by kind of these champions at the top of some of the, a lot of people look into the government and they see chaos or a lot of negative energy gets dumped on government agencies, but you've actually seen people who've done that, who've risen sort of to the top and become real champions for the agencies they work at. It seems like there's a great opportunity to transform government agencies.
Yeah, I've had the good fortune of working in the private sector and nonprofits, mainly from a board perspective. And in the government, both the military side and the civilian side. And I know that the civilian side of government gets really a bad rap, sometimes from political quarters, and sometimes from the public itself, based on information that's in the press and the media. And so the opportunity for me to serve inside of a civilian government agency and at OMB, and spent a lot of, while I was at OMB, spent a lot of time at OPM as we worked on a joint project in employee engagement. So I got an opportunity to see a lot at the highest levels as well as in the trenches of government, and I am absolutely impressed by many of the civil servants, the federal career employees that work for the government, as well as some of the contractors that work for the government. They're not employees, but they're embedded every day, and you can't tell the difference by walking around a government agency who's a Fed and who's a contractor. So I do want to give a shout out to embedded contractors who are working side by side with federal employees, advancing the mission of those organizations. And more to the point of your question, many of them that I work with are world class. And I just think it's a lot is the choices that individuals make. You can take an individual that's in the private sector and put them in the federal government, or put them in nonprofits, or put them wherever you want to. They will be intrinsically motivated to do their best work. And you have a lot of those individuals in the federal government, and they are responsible in large part for helping our government to work, because they do what they do because that's what they do. And they're not dependent on external motivation. It's nice and it feels good when it comes, and it should come. They're just motivated to do their best work and to try to get others to do their best work. And they do an incredible job moving things through the federal bureaucracy that is very complex. You have big P politics, small p politics, the challenges of skill gaps, the outdated policies and laws that are working against you. But day in and day out, they manage to get things done on behalf of the American public that largely doesn't know what's going on. And to have an orderly society is not a given. Somebody is working to keep that order. And the federal government has a broad expanse and influence in our society, and as it does globally. And so my perspective that has been informed now, having worked in the federal government for the last 8 years, in some capacity, is that I have a great appreciation for those people that are leaders through and through, and they're world class in terms of dealing with complex systems, the federal bureaucracy, and getting things done on behalf of the American public. And you take those people out, and you take out the people that they're soldiers. They come in and they do what they're expected to do. If you knock those two groups out, our society descends into chaos because of the role that the federal government plays in our society.
Yeah, so a real opportunity to impact our country and our society, to be nurturing and growing those champions and the people that they're leading in the government.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they do it day in and day out, without a lot of fanfare. They just do it, and they're very accomplished. The federal government workers are highly educated, more so than the private sector. Their levels of education, masters, PhDs, very accomplished professionals. And so I just have a great deal of respect for them. It's not to say that there aren't things that can be improved in the federal government. There are many. I just want to recognize talent where it's due,
and potential. As a magician leader, recognizing the potential of where, when you light these people up, they can go and where they can take us. That's awesome. Tell me, what's next for you? I know you said you're working on a book. You also now act as a consultant, mostly to the federal government.
Yeah, I have all my life. I've worked inside organizations, well, put it not all my life, but for the last 2 decades, I've been working as an HR professional, running the HR function inside organizations. So that's given me a great insight and opportunity to work with people in organizations, up close and personal, understanding their needs and their wants, and understanding the organization needs and wants in organizations that were growing, organizations that are contracting, and organizations that are shutting down and starting up. And so now I'm at a season of my life where I want to be able to help organizations in a way that I can scale beyond just one organization. And so I've set up my own LLC to help in that way. So the book is just a simple way for me to kind of talk about what has worked for me and what I believe work, things that, you can generalize on, such as strategic HR, because there are still HR leaders that are too busy with the transactional work to kind of know some of what's going on. So I love to be able to work with HR leaders to help them improve their learning curve of strategic HR, and be able to help organizational leaders to know what to expect of HR and how to support HR, and how to evaluate HR in terms of advancing the mission of the organization. So that's kind of what's up with me now.
Keep us posted on the book, and we'll get it out there and do some plugs when you have it done. Let's close with a final question, and you can direct this, to HR teams, or you can direct it to business leaders. Give us 3 pearls of wisdom, kind of just in short form, 3 pearls of wisdom to sum up what you've learned that maybe is part of your book as well.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, I'll direct it to organizations and to individuals in those organizations. Number 1, it matters how you treat people. That if we want sustained performance at the next level in organizations, we have to do the things that create sustained performance in individuals. The way I look at it is, how do you create a climate where the human spirit can flourish? And so what are those things? What are those climate factors that create opportunity for the individual to do their best work, for the intelligence and capability of the team to rise to the next level? And how do we as individuals know what we want? If you don't know what you want, that's your first job, is to figure out what you want and how you can work in combination with the organization to get what you want and to serve the organization's need, so that it's a win-win situation for you and the organization. Again, we get to be paid inside organizations to be our best selves and to do our best work and to flourish. And so leaders, as leaders, those in authority, in positions, formal positions, if you want to get the best out of people, create the climate where they do their best work. Individuals, if you want to get a promotion, if you want to make more money, if you want to be fulfilled, then know what you want and know how the organization can serve you and how you can serve that organization, so that both win.
I'm going to count that as all three. And I think you do such a great job of articulating that connection between individual purpose and organizational fulfillment, and how reliant they are on each other. So thank you.
Well,
thank you. It's been a pleasure. I will, in a blog, include a link to your LinkedIn profile if people want to connect with you and hear more about what you're doing and follow your work. So have a great rest of your day, and thank you for being part of the call.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you, and I look forward to continuing our relationship and partnership.
Likewise.